The specific gravity of conservation glue is a thing of beauty. It needs to be heavy enough to hold 500 years of paper fiber together, yet light enough not to discolor the finest Italian parchment. Too thin, and the past falls apart. Too thick, and you've suffocated history. I am Arthur Vance. Most people on Beacon Hill know me as Art, the man who runs the archivist desk, a quiet, overpriced restoration gallery and workshop tucked away on Mount Vernon Street. They think I deal in history. They don't realize I deal in control. My hands, though scarred from 62 years of life, are steady. Right now, they were hovering over a 17th century navigational chart, meticulously replacing a fragment the size of a thumbnail. My breath was shallow, controlled. I wear bifocals that make me look appropriately bookish, a necessary camouflage. My tweed vest and the faint scent of leather and shellac only complete the picture of a man entirely devoted to the quiet discipline of antiquity. I spent the last 9 years perfecting this stillness. 9 years of routine so rigid it borders on liturgical. 9 years since the day my son, Ethan, walked out the door and told me that everything I had ever done, everything I had ever believed in, was a lie built on blood and deception. 9 years of silence, a void so profound it could swallow light. You learn quickly, after you walk away from the things I walked away from, the deep cold water operations, the necessary evils done in the name of compartmentalized security, that silence is not peace. Silence is just the holding of breath before the next explosion. And the only thing keeping the pressure stable was Eleanor. Eleanor, my wife, my anchor. She was the one true piece of stability in a life I had otherwise built on shifting sand and carefully arranged falsehoods. She knows some of it, enough to hate the part of me that used to exist, but she respects the part of me that fights every day to keep it buried. She was currently downstairs, managing a fussy client who believed his first edition Dickens should be treated as a sacred relic rather than a brittle object of commerce. The low, polite rumble of her voice was a constant, soothing frequency in the background. My workspace, the sanctum sanctorum at the back of the gallery, is a fortress of organized chaos. Antique brass microscopes, trays of specialized powders and solvents, climate-controlled cabinets for rare bindings. Everything in its place. Nothing left to chance. Because when you stop leaving things to chance, you stop leaving room for surprises. And surprises in my former life meant death. I finished setting the minuscule fragment of the map. I used the heat lamp for exactly 3 seconds to cure the adhesive. Perfect. The mend was invisible to the naked eye. Another victory against entropy. Another tiny piece of the world put back in order. I stood back, stretching the muscles in my neck. It was precisely 10:45 a.m. on a crisp, anonymous Tuesday in late September. The rhythm of my life was a metronome set to a flawless 60 BPM. And then the front bell chimed, not with the polite tinkle of a customer, but with the heavy, flat thud of a package being dropped onto the counter. I heard Eleanor's voice, sharp with annoyance, addressing the delivery man. "Sir, you must not simply leave, oh." "Thank you." My stomach tightened. I didn't deal in deliveries. Everything came through secure channels or by prearranged courier. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, holding a brown cardboard box. It was ugly, the kind of cheap, thick box used for international economy shipping. It looked profoundly out of place in my exquisite, gilded world. She didn't need to say a word. I could read the tension in her shoulders, the way she held the box away from her body, almost defensively. She knew. We both knew. The piece was over. "It's addressed to you, Art," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The label, it's printed, not handwritten, but the return address." I walked towards her, stripping off my surgical gloves, the white latex popping sharply, the sound loud in the sudden stillness of the room. I looked at the label. The recipient field was meticulous, printed clearly. Arthur Vance, 34, Mount Vernon Street, Boston, Massachusetts, 02108. Then I looked at the sender. The letter seemed to jump off the cheap label stock, striking me like a physical blow, ripping through 9 years of scar tissue. Vance, Zurich, Switzerland. Ethan, my son. After 9 years of absolute, unforgiving silence, a wave of dizzying heat washed over me. Hope is a venom, is the one thing I learned to excise from my life, because hope makes you reckless. But seeing his initial, the familiar, though formal, use of his last name, I felt the raw, foolish surge of a father whose lost child might be reaching out. Eleanor, I heard myself say, the word rough in my throat. Move the map. I need space. I reached for the box, already planning the exact controlled slice I would make along the tape seam, careful not to damage anything inside. I was ready to break the seal, ready to break the silence, ready to break my own rule about hope. That's when Eleanor's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a surprising ferocity. Her eyes, usually warm and steady, were wide with a terror I recognized immediately. The fear that precedes an inevitable, violent change. Don't, Arthur, she pleaded, her voice barely audible. Don't touch it yet. Look closer. I frowned, annoyance battling the sudden, cold spike of dread. What's wrong, Elle? It's just a package. It's from Ethan. She didn't answer. She simply rotated the box slightly, pushing the end facing me, pointing with a trembling finger toward the spot where the cheap, brown tape met the cardboard seam. I leaned in, bracing myself for some obvious security measure, a tripwire, pressure plate, some crude amateur attempt at a threat. But what I saw wasn't a security measure. It was a seal. It was a piece of cheap, dark red sealing wax, melted over the tape line, impressed with a heavy, stylized image. An eagle. I knew that seal. I knew it better than I knew the back of my own hand. It was the personal cipher, the mark of authentication used by the operative specialists of the archives, my former life. The organization I had fled. The organization that did not allow resignations. And then I saw the detail Eleanor had spotted. The one microscopic flaw that pierced the mundane surface of the cheap package, screaming a silent, horrifying truth across thousands of miles. The eagle's stylized eye, a tiny circular indentation in the wax, wasn't smooth. It had a barely perceptible, hair-thin scratch running across it, a minuscule line that fractured the perfect symmetry. I had put that scratch there 30 years ago, when I first carved the matrix for my personal field seal. I had been careless, testing the pressure on the brass. It was my signal, my code, a code used only for internal, high-risk communications during extraction protocols. It had 3 potential meanings, all catastrophic. And in this context, after 9 years of silence, the meaning was brutal, absolute, and designed to stop me dead in my tracks. The red wax with my scratch meant red code. Asset compromised. Do not engage. It wasn't a message from Ethan. It was a message about Ethan. My vision narrowed. The comforting smell of parchment and shellac vanished, replaced by the sterile, metallic scent of impending violence. 9 years of discipline snapped like brittle wood. I reached for the small, titanium-cased utility knife I kept tucked into the cuff of my tweed vest. Arthur, Eleanor whispered, tears finally forming in her eyes. He's gone, isn't he? They used him to find you. I sliced the tape clean down the middle, my movement sudden, precise, devoid of hesitation. No, I replied, my voice flat, cold, and utterly devoid of hope. The professional had taken over. The restorer was gone. The archivist was awake. They used him to send me a warning. If they'd simply wanted to find me, they wouldn't have bothered with the subtlety. This package isn't a trap for me, Elle. It's evidence they want back. And if they sent it this way, it means Ethan managed to get something out. It means my son is still fighting. I lifted the lid. The cardboard groaned. I peered inside, expecting explosives, tracking devices, or a gruesome message. What I saw was much worse. It was a symbol of everything Ethan had fought for, and the terrifying realization of how deep he had gone. The interior of the box smelled faintly of old linen and dust, the comforting, almost medicinal aroma of things long neglected. Yet, the scent felt manufactured, deliberately chosen to mislead. Inside lay a book. Just one. It was a small, octavo volume, bound in faded crimson buckram. A compendium of European naval treaties, 1850 to 1870. A title so mind-numbingly dull it was the perfect camouflage. No one in their right mind would steal it, let alone ship it internationally via an expedited service. I lifted it out carefully, rotating it in the cool, filtered light of the workshop. The binding was superficially damaged, a tear near the spine, a few scuffs on the corners. Standard library wear. Except the wear wasn't uniform. My fingers, trained to read paper texture like Braille, immediately detected a discontinuity in the buckram along the top edge of the pages. The texture felt too brittle, the stiffness too uniform. A false bottom, or rather, a false interior. I muttered, more to myself than to Eleanor, who was watching me with the terrifying stillness of someone awaiting a diagnosis. He learned the fundamentals. Good. It was a deep, bitter ache to realize that my son, the promising young investigative journalist who wanted nothing to do with my shadow world, had been forced to adopt its most basic, insidious techniques to survive. I took a thin, flexible Japanese restoration spatula and slipped it between the binding and the text block, easing the pages away from the spine. The core of the book had been expertly hollowed out, not with the crude knife cuts of a desperate amateur, but with surgical precision, leaving a neat, rectangular cavity perfectly sized for its contents. Inside, nestled against the hollowed paper, were two items. The first was a vintage stopwatch, chrome casing, heavily oxidized, with a faint green patina developing around the winding crown. It looked like something a track coach might have used in the 1950s. It was obviously non-functional. The large central hand was stuck permanently at 47 seconds. The second item was a modern device, a small, matte black unit roughly the size of a thumb drive, clearly military-grade and tamper-resistant. A crypt flash drive, a crypt key. No brand markings, no serial numbers. Just a tiny, almost invisible red LED that pulsed once every 30 seconds, signaling its readiness. No notes, Eleanor observed, her voice strained. No letter, nothing personal. There couldn't be, I said, placing the two objects on a sheet of acid-free paper. My mind was already racing, categorizing the assets, prioritizing the threats. Any written note would be compromised. Any personal contact would lead them straight to me. This entire package is disposable, deniable. This means Ethan is highly disciplined, or someone disciplined helped him. I picked up the crypt key. It was cold, inert. The first rule of archives protocol: never engage with an unknown variable immediately. If the organization that sent this package knew enough to use my personal cipher, the Scratched Eagle, it meant they were playing a game of information retrieval, not simple elimination. They wanted whatever was on this drive. They assumed I would panic, plug it in, and attempt to decrypt it immediately, and they would be waiting on the other side. This crypt key, I explained, sliding it under a powerful magnifying glass. It's highly secure, probably layered with multiple defenses, a timed erase, a tripwire that transmits our location once the decryption starts, even a data bomb that could corrupt every link system. So we don't open it, Eleanor said, stating the obvious with weary resignation. Not yet. We use it as bait. But first, we need to know what they're looking for, and more importantly, what Ethan was doing in Zurich. Zurich, a global banking hub, a center for corporate espionage and black market document trade. Not exactly the kind of place a crusading journalist goes to write a story about a corrupt municipal zoning board. I turned my attention to the book itself, the Naval Treaties. The buckram cover felt rough. I gently peeled back a corner of the cloth near the spine with a scalpel. Underneath, I exposed the heavy cardboard base. Etched into the cardboard, barely visible to the naked eye, was a set of 4 small, precise numbers, 10.02. This is the first piece, I said, a flicker of cold satisfaction in my voice. When you've been out of the game for 9 years, finding the thread again is like a drug. It's a code. Time, perhaps. Or a file extension. But it's too simple for Ethan's field work. It's an internal reference. I stepped away from the bench and moved to the back wall. Hidden behind a heavy, antique map of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was my communications array. It looked like a standard server rack, but contained enough custom-built encryption and frequency-hopping technology to run a small nation's intelligence network. I quickly initiated a low-level, wideband spectral scan of the workshop. Standard procedure: search for any passive or active surveillance devices. My own protocols were layered, designed to reject even quantum-level intrusion. The scan ran for 2 minutes. Silence. The system reported all clear. Too clean. That's what the archivist in me knew. If they knew I had the package, they were watching me. But they weren't using the standard government frequencies or even common corporate espionage gear. They were using something new, something customized, or they were being extraordinarily patient, relying entirely on the lure of the crypt key. I looked at the package again. The box, the tape, the seal, all perfectly designed to attract my attention and force a specific, desperate reaction. They knew my weakness, my son. Before I touched the crypt key again, I needed to know who was holding the leash. I picked up the stopwatch, the second component. It was heavy in my hand, an anachronism. Why include a broken, 50-year-old timing device? I moved over to the workbench microscope, setting the watch on the platform. I used a pair of precision tweezers to carefully pop off the thin, crystal face. The interior was dry, dusty. The gears were jammed, not broken. I focused the lens, zoomed in on the minute marks along the circumference of the dial. There it was, not visible to the naked eye, but under 30x magnification, perfectly focused. It wasn't a flaw in the paint or a speck of dirt. It was a microdot, a tiny, almost fluorescent speck of high-resolution film, affixed right over the 55-foot minute marker. I carefully lifted the microdot with the edge of a clean razor blade and placed it onto a separate slide. I ran it through the digital reader, which projected the image onto my main monitor. The image resolved slowly, pixel by agonizing pixel. It was a photograph of a bank document, specifically a cashier's check. The amount was staggering, $2.4 million. The issuer was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, Ethelred Logistics. But the recipient was the key. The name, printed in crisp, formal bank type, was the Roberts Campaign Fund. Senator Robert Roberts, Republican, Ohio, current chairman of the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee, a man who rose from obscurity to immense power in the 9 years I'd been retired, a man who, incidentally, had been a mid-level analyst in the covert intelligence community during the period I was running high-value extractions, a man I always suspected had the icy, calculated ambition of a sociopath. And now, Ethan had linked Roberts to illegal offshore money, likely tied to the very same private-public contracting that had been the hallmark of my old unit, the archives, before I left. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from realization. Ethan hadn't just stumbled into corporate corruption. He had stumbled into my past. He was investigating the structure I had helped build, the one now being run by a politician who had weaponized it for personal gain. Senator Roberts was not just a threat. He was a former colleague. He knew my capabilities, my protocols, and most importantly, he knew about my family. And then I knew. The package wasn't a warning from Ethan. It was a last act of defiance by Ethan, a desperate attempt to weaponize the truth he found and throw it at the only man he trusted, the man who had the skills to use it, his father. I pulled out my secure satellite phone, a brick of obsolete tech that only held 3 numbers. I quickly dialed the first. A deep, gravelly voice answered instantly. "You're late, Art. I thought the dust finally claimed you." "It's about the dust, Marsh," I said, keeping my voice low and level. "I need deep analysis on Ethelred Logistics, Zurich bank transfers, and a senator named Roberts. Specifically, anything involving historical asset recovery or the movement of specialized personnel over the last 6 months." Marshall Marsh Gilman, my logistics expert, tech genius, and general problem solver for the last 30 years, whistled softly. "A senator? You really decided to jump back in at the deep end, didn't you?" "The package arrived this morning," I said, skipping the preamble. "Evans, Zurich." I found the signature on the wax. A tense silence stretched across the line. Marsh was the only other person who knew that specific scratch mark. "The eagle's broken eye," Marsh finally said, his voice dropping all trace of humor. Christ, Art, they didn't just find you. They used your own son as a damn envelope. I need eyes, Marsh. Local perimeter. I cleared the shop, but they're using something silent. If Roberts is running the archives now, he's got unlimited budget and high-grade talent. Consider it done, Marsh replied. I'll use the commercial grid, disposable infrastructure. Give me 20 minutes. But Art, be careful. If Roberts is the one pulling the strings, he won't be subtle for long. He always hated loose ends. And you, my friend, are the loosest end of all. I hung up. I stood in the dead silence of the workshop, the ancient map staring down at me, the tiny crypt key pulsing its deadly red light on the table. They were here. They had been patient. They had used my son's life as currency. My retirement, my beautiful, boring, peaceful 9 years of restoration and order was over. I looked at the crypt key. Whatever data was stored inside, it was the only leverage I had left. The game was simple now. I had to prove that the quiet old man with the bifocals and the glue was actually the deadliest strategic mind they had ever allowed to walk away. I put on my coat. L, I need you to pack a small bag. Standard protocol. Nothing identifiable. Don't leave the house. I'm going out to find the shadows. Where are you going, Art? I checked the clip of the compact 9mm I kept strapped to my inner vest, a relic from my past that fit perfectly inside my Restores kit. I'm going to take a walk around the neighborhood, L. I need to know exactly who is watching my home, and I need to let them know I see them. The calm smile my old construction crews knew meant someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson spread across my face. It felt alien, but comfortable. The archivist was home. Beacon Hill is designed for observation, if you know how to look. The narrow, gaslit streets, the precisely angled townhouses, the wrought iron fences, they all afford clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. It's a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. I left the gallery through the back entrance, a discreet passage that led into a brick-paved alley favored by garbage trucks and the occasional delivery scooter. I traded my tweed coat for a simple, wind-resistant navy jacket. Neutrality is key. I blended in immediately, becoming just another anonymous elderly resident stepping out for an errand. My objective was simple: force a reaction. An observer, no matter how disciplined, hates losing their asset. I walked 3 blocks north toward Charles Street, keeping my pace steady, just slightly slower than average. I didn't look in windows or make any sudden movements. I observed the world not directly, but through reflection. The polished brass door knockers, the convex security mirrors mounted at blind intersections, the tinted glass of parked cars, they were all my eyes. The street was busy enough to provide cover. Tourists, Yale alumni on a nostalgic stroll, expensive dogs being walked by expensive dog walkers. It took exactly 12 minutes to find the disturbance. Not a person, initially, but a car. A late-model black Audi A6, tinted windows, parked near the corner of Revere and Pinckney. It was a common sight, blending perfectly with the neighborhood's affluence. But the parking job was too perfect. Slightly angled to allow an immediate pullout and positioned directly opposite a tall brownstone with a clear view down Mount Vernon Street, my street. And the driver. That was the tell. In the reflection of a bakery window, I caught a brief flash of the driver's face. Mid-30s, wearing sunglasses despite the fading afternoon sun, and staring straight ahead with the kind of intense, unblinking focus that screams professional surveillance. He was drinking coffee from a disposable cup, a classic mistake. Professionals rely on hydration, but they rarely generate unnecessary waste that links them to a specific location. It suggests a certain arrogance, a belief in impunity. Not government. Too sloppy for the highest tier, too slick for corporate security. Robert's private contractors. I continued walking, crossing the street diagonally, forcing myself within 30 feet of the Audi. I could feel the tension radiating from the car. The man was waiting for a signal, waiting for me to do something predictable like go to the bank or meet a contact. I didn't deviate. I turned into a small, elegant dry cleaning establishment. Inside, I didn't drop off clothes. I went straight to the back, where the massive industrial steam press was hissing. I handed the attendant $50. Emergency service. I need 3 minutes in the back room, uninterrupted. I'm having an episode of vertigo. The attendant, trained to handle eccentric wealthy patrons, simply nodded and pointed towards a small utility closet. In the closet, I quickly accessed my pocket array, a small device I built from a modified satellite tracker. I didn't try to jam the Audi. Jamming is an admission of fear. Instead, I used the array to send a tight beam burst of white noise directly at the microphone grid inside the Audi. It wasn't loud enough to be heard outside the car, but inside, it would sound like a sudden, irritating blast of static interference. I also tagged the Audi's license plate, an obscure rental plate from Rhode Island, and its VIN with a low-power tracer. I waited 1 minute, listening intently. The man in the Audi reacted exactly as expected. The moment the static hit, he swore, checked his comms gear, and looked around, searching for the source of the unexpected interference. His focus shifted from me to his equipment, a momentary vulnerability. I slipped out of the dry cleaners, walking back the way I came, moving faster now. I passed the Audi again. The driver was still cursing his comms. He didn't see me. He was focused on the static, focused on the immediate problem. Rule of the hunt. Make the predator chase a ghost before it finds its prey. I returned to the workshop. Report. Eleanor said immediately, handing me a glass of room-temperature water. She knew my equilibrium would be off after that forced walk. One Audi A6, civilian plate. Professional driver, but slightly overconfident. He's contracted muscle. L, not an archivist veteran. He's watching the house, waiting for me to make a break for it. What did Marsh say? As if on cue, my secure line chirped. The custom, almost inaudible sound of a vintage telegraph key. I picked up. Marsh. Art, you stirred the nest quickly. I ran the Ethelred check. That company isn't logistics. It's a black box entity used to funnel money from stabilization efforts in the Middle East, specifically the dispersal of seized assets, military hardware, and historical artifacts after a regime collapse. My blood ran cold. Historical artifacts? Yeah, the kind of stuff he used to extract. But this is worse. The transfers are going directly to Robert's political action committees and private consulting firms. This isn't just bribery. It's funding an entire political machine with black market profits. And the personnel? Oh, they've been busy, Art. They've shifted the core archivist structure, the extraction specialists, the deep cover people, out of government oversight entirely. Roberts basically privatized your old department. They're calling themselves the Aegis Group now. They operate out of a shell company in Virginia. The Aegis Group. A nice, clean name for a dirty operation. Any word on Ethan? I pressed. Marsh hesitated. I got a flicker. A burner phone pinged a satellite relay near Geneva 4 days ago. The ping originated from a secure data center that handles large corporate archives. It was a burst transmission, extremely short, highly encrypted. Standard journalistic protocol when sending a massive data dump. Did he send the data? I can't tell. The signal was cut mid-transmission, abruptly, like someone pulled the plug. I looked down at the crypt key sitting inertly on the table. The timing was too perfect. He tried to send the data, Marsh. I concluded, my voice raspy. He failed. They took him, and they intercepted his transmission attempt. They sent me the key in the hope that if the data is recoverable, I'll be stupid enough to finish the job for them. If he's alive, they need him to unlock the full file, Marsh pointed out, or they need me to confirm the location of the backup. If Ethan used a journalistic data center, there's a good chance the full file is still sitting on a server somewhere, corrupted and locked. They want the location or the final decryption key, or both. I looked at the non-functional stopwatch again, and a thought struck me with the force of an avalanche. Marsh, I need you to research this specific piece of equipment, I instructed, picking up the stopwatch. A Hanhart or Hoyer, 1950s. Find out what military contracts used this exact model during the early Cold War era. Specifically, any contracts related to time-delayed mechanisms or seismic testing. Why the 50s? Because that's when Roberts was born, I said softly, the gears turning in my head, grinding away the debris. And this entire operation is about history, Marsh. Roberts isn't just covering a crime. He's trying to rewrite the past. And the past is all I deal in. I hung up, the feeling of utter detachment settling over me. They had forced my hand. They had violated my peace. Now, I would violate their order. I moved to my communications server and began the process of setting up a layered, disposable IP mask. It was time to give the Aegis Group exactly what they wanted, a target. But before I engaged the enemy, I had to solidify my own foundation. I needed to talk to Eleanor about the one thing I had protected her from for 9 years, the truth about Ethan's departure. That story, that lie, was about to be exposed, and I needed her to understand the real stakes. The aroma of Earl Grey tea was the only thing holding the workshop together. Eleanor had boiled water and set out 2 delicate porcelain cups, a gesture of normalcy in the face of inevitable chaos. We sat across the large restoration table, the crypt key and the stopwatch lying between us like unexploded ordnance. "They'll be here soon, Arthur," she said, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. She wasn't panicking. She was assessing. That was the military wife in her, the part that had learned to function under permanent threat. "Not until they think they know what I plan to do with the key," I corrected her. "They want the data, Elle. They don't want to mess." "Not yet." She looked at me, her gaze piercing through the bifocals, the tweed, the years of quiet living, straight into the core of the operative I try to hide. "You said you need me to know the stakes. The stakes are Ethan's life. I understand that. But I need to understand why he hated you enough to leave and go hunting ghosts on his own. I need the truth, Art. The whole history. The truth. The thing I dealt in every day, yet the thing I shielded my family from the most. When Ethan left, I began, the words tasting like rust. He said I was a monster, a government thug who traded conscience for compliance. He said he was going to expose the rot, the black budgets, the extrajudicial methods. He believed every story he wrote. He was genuinely idealistic. "He is your son," Eleanor said quietly. "He inherited your rage for injustice, but none of your discipline." "Exactly. And that made him vulnerable. He was brilliant, Elle. By the time he was accepted into Yale, he was already digging into the overlap between global finance and government secrecy. He wasn't chasing scandals. He was chasing the structure, the archives." I paused, tracing the rim of my teacup. I knew, even before he knew, that he would eventually find the truth about me. Not just the truth of my job, which I told him was high-level foreign asset recovery, but the truth of the consequences, the necessary compromises, the bodies. "So what did you do?" Eleanor prompted. "I had to break him of the belief that he could save the world. I had to make him hate me so much that he would flee the system I was part of, thus protecting him from the system itself." She frowned. "You broke up with your son to protect him? That is the most cold-hearted and yet perfectly Arthur Vance logic I have ever heard." "I didn't just let him walk away, Elle. I accelerated it. I planted a specific file on his laptop, a heavily doctored, highly inflammatory leak detailing an operation I led in the Balkans years ago. It made me look like an absolute war criminal, the butcher of Novi Sad, a man who engineered a regime collapse for corporate access to rare earth minerals." I watched her face as the implications sank in. The shock, the hurt, the understanding. "You sacrificed your relationship with him, your name, your soul, to save his future," she whispered. "He saw the file. He tracked the evidence. He came to me, white with fury, demanding I explain. I confirmed it all. I told him I was a mercenary, that I enjoyed the power. I told him every ugly, self-serving lie I could conceive. I pushed him away with such force that he believed the only way to retain his moral center was to cut me out completely. I rubbed my temples, the residual exhaustion of 9 years of lying hitting me hard. He ran. He changed his name slightly. He became a ghost, untraceable to my enemies because, as far as they were concerned, Arthur Vance's son had disowned him and was therefore irrelevant. "But you underestimated him, didn't you?" Eleanor said, her voice laced with melancholy pride. "You taught him to find the truth, and he went after the very people you were running from. He chased the structure all the way back to the source, to Roberts. Yes, I trained him too well. He became a better archivist than I ever was. He didn't just find a senator. He found a structure that replaced the structure I left. Eleanor stood, walking around the table to stand beside me. She put a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Okay, Art, now I know the history. Now I know what we are fighting for. To prove that you're not the monster you pretended to be, and to save the only man who still believes in absolute truth, even if it costs him everything. What do you need me to do? I need you to be my anchor, Elle, and I need you to be prepared to disappear. My cover has always been my reality. I'm a highly respected restorer. This is a fact, a truth I built brick by brick. My knowledge of inks, papers, historical provenance, and conservation standards is impeccable. No one questions it. By 2 p.m., I was on an Amtrak Acela Express heading to Washington, D.C., dressed in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit that screamed wealthy academic rather than former intelligence operative. My briefcase held only two things: a proposal for the restoration of a damaged congressional charter, a legitimate project, and a custom-built, miniaturized signal interceptor disguised as a vintage fountain pen. Marsh had done his initial work. Roberts, as chairman of the Intelligence Oversight Committee, was deeply entrenched. He used his position to shield Aegis Group operations, classifying their private activities as matters of national security. The key, Marsh noted, was the timing. Ethan's ping was 4 days ago. Roberts was currently in D.C. for a crucial briefing with the Secretary of State. Convenient. My plan was twofold: establish the legitimacy of my presence in D.C. and force contact with Roberts' internal network to confirm their suspicion level. I checked into the Willard Hotel. Not cheap, but central and excellent for observing D.C. power players. I spent the first hour in the lobby, scanning the room. The Willard is a magnet for lobbyists and congressional staff, the perfect noise floor. I noticed a specific type of employee circulating, too fit for a desk job, too well-dressed for basic security. Clean-cut, discreet earpieces. Aegis muscle. They were everywhere the power flowed. I made my first move. I called the Congressional Library Acquisitions Office and requested an immediate meeting regarding the charter proposal, emphasizing the historical urgency. Within 30 minutes, I had an appointment with a chief archivist named Mr. Hayes, a boring, detail-oriented man I had previously worked with. I met Hayes, gave a brilliant, detailed pitch about the restoration process, and slipped in a subtle piece of information. Mr. Hayes, I said, leaning conspiratorially, I recently handled an obscure naval treaty document from the mid-19th century. Found it fascinating. It had been used, quite improperly, as a dummy binding for a small, highly secure digital storage device. Shows you what lengths people will go to conceal modern secrets in old containers. Hayes, focused on his parchment, barely registered the comment. But I wasn't talking to Hayes. I was waiting for the eavesdroppers. As I left the congressional building, I felt the shift. The background hum of the city tightened. My subtle statement about the dummy binding would be flagged instantly by any Aegis operative listening to congressional staff comms, because it matched the exact composition of the package I received. They knew I had opened the box. Now they knew I was here. I walked the 4 blocks back to the Willard, the air charged with anticipation. I was a fish swimming directly into the line of the hook. I reached the grand lobby, pausing to appreciate the enormous, antique crystal chandelier. I knew what was coming. I had given them the signal. I have the information, and I am your backyard. A moment later, a young man, immaculate in a gray suit, detached himself from the bar area and approached me. He didn't look like muscle. He looked like a highly polished Yale grad, perhaps a Senate legislative aide. He held out a hand. Mr. Vance? Arthur Vance. That's correct, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, trained, but polite. The kind of grip designed to convey respect and dominance simultaneously. Senator Roberts sends his regards, sir. He noticed your name in the visitor logs of the library. He was an admirer of your work on the Gettysburg Address manuscript restoration years ago. He was hoping to arrange a brief, informal chat. Tonight, perhaps, at his residence. The invitation wasn't polite. It was a subpoena delivered with white gloves. I smiled, a slow, practiced gesture of professional courtesy. That's quite an honor. Tell the senator I would be delighted. I appreciate the value of an unscheduled consultation. What time should I arrive? 8 o'clock, sir. He prefers privacy. The young man handed me a minimalist, heavy card with only an address, a Georgetown townhouse. As he turned to leave, I added, deliberately low, tell the senator I will be bringing the naval charts, just in case he needs a visual aid. The aide stopped, his back stiffening imperceptibly. He didn't turn around. Understood, Mr. Vance. 8 o'clock. He left. I watched him go, then retired to my room. The senator, the butcher, the puppet master of the Aegis Group, was inviting me into his lair. He didn't want the data. He wanted to know where the data was located, and he wanted to look me in the eye when he demanded it. He assumed I would arrive defenseless, seeking a diplomatic solution. He was wrong. I wasn't coming to negotiate. I was coming to conduct a reconnaissance mission, disguised as a friendly consultation. And I was going to find out exactly what he thought he had taken from my son. 8 o'clock in Georgetown is a study in muted affluence. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of damp earth and old money. Robert Roberts' townhouse was imposing, a federal-style behemoth, tastefully renovated, secured by state-of-the-art systems that were designed to be invisible. I didn't try to evade the security. I walked straight up the steps. I allowed the two young men in charcoal suits flanking the mahogany door to pat me down. A surprisingly thorough, professional search. They took my phone, my fountain pen, which they didn't recognize as a signal interceptor, merely a curious piece of vintage tech, and, more pointedly, they noticed the slight bulge of my inner vest holster. "If you don't mind, Mr. Vance," one of them said smoothly, indicating the holster with a subtle movement of his eyes. "It's an old habit," I replied, shrugging off the navy jacket. "A necessity when dealing with certain collectors. It's a Sig Sauer P229, clean and legal. I assure you, it will remain holstered unless my life is actively threatened." The operative looked momentarily startled. They weren't used to their targets being so transparent about carrying hardware. "Leave it," a cold voice instructed from the interior of the house. The operative hesitated, then complied with the unseen command, stepping aside to let me enter. The foyer was vast, decorated with pieces of art that were undeniably valuable, yet lacked any personal taste. They were assets, not treasures. Senator Roberts was waiting for me in his private library. He didn't rise. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, lit only by a single green-shaded banker's lamp. He looked exactly as he did on C-SPAN. Silver hair, impeccable suit, the gaze of a man perpetually annoyed by incompetence. "Arthur," he said, his voice retaining the low, smooth resonance of a seasoned politician. "It's been too long. 9 years, is it? You were the years well. The dust agrees with you." "Robert," I returned, walking to a large leather armchair opposite his desk. I sat, carefully controlling my posture. "And you've traded the shadows for the spotlight. A surprising move for a man who always preferred the quiet brutality of logistics." He smiled, a thin, calculating movement of the lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Logistics, Arthur, is everything. And nothing is more logical than moving up. Tell me, how is Eleanor? And your son, Ethan?" The shift in subject was immediate, aggressive. "Eleanor is stable. Ethan is doing important work," I said, my tone flat, offering nothing. Roberts leaned back, folding his hands over his vest. "Yes, important work. Investigative journalism. A noble pursuit. Though prone to dangerous misinterpretations, wouldn't you agree? Misinterpretation requires poor fact-checking, Robert. Ethan is meticulous. He was meticulous enough to find the ethyl-red paper trail," Roberts conceded, nodding slowly. "Impressive for a man without our access, but dangerously naive. He thought he found a crime. He failed to see he found the infrastructure. Infrastructure built on stolen archives and black market assets," I countered. Roberts chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You always were a moralist, Arthur. The documents Ethan was chasing, the military contracts, the supply lines, They are crucial to maintaining continuity in regions where official government presence is impractical. We provide stability. We ensure the right people are in power. And sometimes, Arthur, stability requires moving a few pieces of history around, shall we say, non-traditionally. Or funding your Senate campaign with black money. I finished for him. Roberts didn't flinch. The world requires funding, Arthur. Now, let's dispense with the pleasantries. You received a package this morning. A charming little red book with a hollow center. A gift from a desperate boy. I did. And you saw the seal, he continued, his eyes drilling into mine. The little mark you placed there, 30 years ago. A signal. You know that seal means the asset. Ethan was compromised during extraction, but the payload might be intact. I held his gaze. I know what it means. It means you used my son as a courier, Robert. It means you knew precisely how to draw me out of 9 years of perfect isolation. I didn't use him, Arthur. He fell into my hands. He was trying to transmit a very large, encrypted file from a data center in Geneva. My people intercepted the transmission attempt and captured the source. We have Ethan. He is uncomfortable, but alive. We brought him to a secure location, hoping he would tell us where he stored the full, uncorrupted backup of the file. And did he? No. He is stubborn, like his father. But he was resourceful. Before we fully contained him, he managed to ship that damned book with the crypt key. He was hoping you would solve his last puzzle. Roberts leaned forward, finally showing a sliver of predatory interest. Now, here's the exchange, Arthur. Simple logistics. You have a crypt key. You're the only person who understands the deeper, multi-layered codes Ethan might have used. Codes you yourself taught him. You open the key, you tell me the location of the backup data, and I give you your son back. And what if the key itself contains the data? Robert scoffed. It doesn't. We ran diagnostics. It's a pointer, Arthur. A small access point. The full file is vast, gigabytes of archived transactions, audio logs, and high-resolution scans of classified documents. It's too big for that little key. The key opens the door, but the archive is somewhere else. Probably a dark server in the European Alps. A journalist's contingency plan. He tapped the desk once, sharply. So let's not waste time. Where did he hide the archival index? What does the broken stopwatch mean? What code did he use to protect the primary key? I allowed a long silence to stretch between us, calculating every angle. Roberts was smart, but he was operating on a dangerous assumption, that I was negotiating for Ethan's life. I was not. I was negotiating for the information I needed to bring down his entire structure. You know what's funny about powerful men, Robert? I asked, my voice barely above a conversational volume. He looked annoyed by the delay. Enlighten me, Arthur. They never see the trap until it's too late. You assume I came here to save my son. I came here to confirm what he found. And you just confirmed it all. You confirmed the Aegis Group is using stolen archives to fund political espionage. You confirmed the data is massive and dangerous. And you confirmed the only man who can unlock it is me. I paused, leaning in, letting the cold steel of my gaze bore into him. And you made one final mistake, Robert. You told me Ethan is uncomfortable, but alive. That means you still need him as leverage. But if I give you the backup location, you will kill him because I will no longer be an asset. I will be a threat. Robert's facade cracked. His smile vanished, replaced by the grimace of a man who realizes the power dynamic has suddenly shifted. Don't be foolish, Arthur. You're an old man playing dress-up. Give me the key. Give me the location. Or I'll send you back to Beacon Hill in a sealed box, just like the one that arrived this morning. I stood up slowly, deliberately. The two operatives, flanking the door, tensed immediately. You won't kill me yet, Robert, I stated, walking towards the exit. Because I haven't told you the code. And I'm not going to. Not until Ethan is standing on American soil, fully free, and you're sitting behind bars. I stopped at the door, turning back to him. Tell your men to leave the Audi alone, Robert. It's compromised. Tell them to try something more subtle. Because the game has changed. I'm no longer the target you lured out of retirement. I am the archivist, and I have just declared open season on your entire operation. I left the library. The operatives were visibly confused, waiting for the senator's command. "Let him go," Roberts barked from the darkness of a library, the rage finally spilling into his voice. "He thinks he has the advantage. He doesn't." I retrieved my weapon and my possessions. As I walked out into the cool Georgetown air, I activated the tiny signal interceptor disguised as a fountain pen. It immediately began recording the communications chatter emanating from the Roberts townhouse. I now had two things: confirmation that Ethan was alive and confirmation that the senator was desperate for the archive location. The time for stillness was over. It was time for movement. I needed to open that crypt key, and I needed Marsh's report on the vintage stopwatch. Because the secret wasn't just in the data, it was in the history itself. The Acela Express back to Boston felt different. It was no longer a symbol of my quiet cover. It was a mobile command post. I sat in the club car, nursing a lukewarm coffee, ignoring the stares of the other passengers who registered me as a man of means immersed in high-level financial worries. I wasn't worried. I was focused. Roberts knew I had the key and knew I was coming for him. The fragile stability I had maintained was gone, replaced by a clear objective. Marsh called immediately after I passed New Haven. "You rattled him, Art," Marsh said, sounding amused. "My systems picked up a frenzy of encrypted traffic coming out of that Georgetown address the moment you left. He's putting Aegis Group on high alert. He's going to come at you hard." "Good. Keeps him busy," I replied. "Did you find anything on the stopwatch?" "That's why I called. It's a Hanhart military-grade timer, model 417ES. Extremely rare. Used for two things: high-altitude flight timing in the early 50s and precision detonation timing for early seismic testing units by the Army Corps of Engineers. But listen to this, Art. That specific model, the 417ES, was part of a limited internal audit conducted by the Army Inspector General in 1965. Why an audit? They had a massive discrepancy in inventory. A whole shipment of those timers vanished from the storage depot in New London, Connecticut, the week before a major geological survey began near the Yale campus in New Haven. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and precise. New Haven. Yale. Roberts mentioned New Haven in passing when he discussed his time in the service. Decades ago, I mused. He was stationed there during training. And who else was in New Haven, obsessively cataloging ancient documents and occasionally teaching his very idealistic son how to spot a false ledger? Marsh asked rhetorically. Me, I confirmed. I used to meet Ethan at Yale when he was a freshman. I taught him about archiving, preservation, and the art of hiding things in plain sight. We spent hours in the Sterling Memorial Library, poring over rare books. The missing shipment, the Hanhart timer, New Haven, and Yale. It wasn't about seismic testing. It was about location. The missing timers had been stored, perhaps, or converted. The stopwatch is the map, Marsh, not the code. It points to where the backup is hidden. Where? If Ethan was following my lessons, he would hide the most important secret in the place he learned to appreciate secrets: the Sterling Library. I used to joke that the only way to hide something from the government was to put it in the one place they're guaranteed not to look: a massive, underfunded, and disorganized National Archive. I looked at the cryptex. I need to open this, Marsh. Now. But I need insurance. If they track the activation, I need a secondary signal to overload their sensors. I'm already on it. I prepped a Ghost server in Singapore. The moment you enter the code, it will flood the East Coast spectrum with enough false telemetry and military-grade encryption to make Roberts think the entire Chinese Navy is docking in Boston Harbor. You'll have a 45-second window, maximum, before they triangulate your real position. 45 seconds is a lifetime. I hung up, settling into the rhythmic hum of the train. I took out the crypt key. It was time for the final, biggest risk. I knew the code could not be arbitrary. Ethan was smart, but he was also deeply emotional, despite his journalistic rigor. His life, his rage, his pursuit of truth, it all revolved around one defining moment: the day he broke with me. And what defined that break? The lie fed him. The lie that I was the butcher of Novi Sad. The crypt key required a 7-digit numerical input. I tried the obvious first, the date of the fake Balkan operation I had planted on his laptop. Click. Denied. I tried the date of his graduation from Yale. Click. Denied. I closed my eyes, remembering the last time I saw him, raw with betrayal and moral disgust, standing in the doorway, his suit jacket rumpled. He was crying, but not from sadness, from fury. I hate everything you stand for. I wish you had never been my father. He hadn't been thinking about the crime. He had been thinking about the person. I remembered the one thing I taught him, that he could never forgive, the ability to compartmentalize, to invert the truth. If the truth was the day he was born, the single purest moment in my existence, then the code had to be the inverse of that truth. Ethan's birthday, April 25th, 1994. 8 digits. I ran the digits backward. 499152240. Too long. I tried the inverted sequence of the date, omitting the century. 495204. 6 digits. The key required 7. I looked back at the small, crimson book. The hidden number I found etched in the spine. 10.02. A reference point. The time of a meeting, a file name. Or the 2 digits I was missing. I tried the inverted birth date with the prefix 10. 1049520. I pushed the button slowly, deliberately. The tiny red LED flickered, then turned solid green. Success. My secure phone immediately buzzed. Marsh had initiated the ghost flood. The train was now a beacon of digital chaos. The crypt key opened, not with a mechanical click, but with a faint, high-pitched electronic whine. It contained no data. Roberts was right. It was a pointer. On the screen was a single, 3-part string of text, highly compressed. Yale, Sterling, binding _257 1994 _47. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. The location was confirmed. Sterling Library, Yale. But the final part of the string was the genius, the combination of our history. 257 was a shelf number. 1994 was Ethan's birth year. And 47? I looked at the non-functional stopwatch, stuck permanently at 47 seconds. The entire package was a map of our shared, failed history. The stopwatch wasn't broken. It was paused, indicating the exact microlocation of the archive. Ethan had found the one place I had forgotten, a deep structural recess in the library I showed him when he was a boy, a place where a book could be hidden inside the building itself. I immediately initiated the communication sequence. Marsh, New Haven. I need transport and a clear route. I'm going into the belly of the beast. They'll be on me within the hour. Roberts is already mobilizing, Art. You've just declared war. I'll meet you outside New Haven, but you won't be able to stay clean. You know that, right? Clean ended 9 years ago, Marsh, I said, disconnecting the call. Now it's about justice and restoration. I stood up, pulling on my jacket. The train was slowing, pulling into the station. I was far from Boston, but close enough to the battlefield. The time for acting like a scholar was over. The time for the archivist to hunt was now. I arrived at the rendezvous point near New Haven, an abandoned industrial park outside the city limits. It was 1 a.m., the air thick with the smell of wet concrete and rust. Marsh was waiting, not in a car, but in a heavy-duty, unmarked panel van. He looked exactly the same, round, perpetually rumpled, and wearing the look of a man who found the world's chaos deeply entertaining. You look like you've seen a ghost, Art. Marsh greeted me, opening the van's side door. Worse, I've seen a senator with his hand in the till, and he knows I know, I said, climbing in. Marsh had already set up a mobile operations center inside. 3 glowing monitors, secure comms, and several trays of gear. He's sending 3 teams, Marsh informed me, pointing to a holographic map shimmering over a monitor. The map displayed the entire Yale campus, overlaid with 3 distinct, rapidly moving clusters of encrypted signals. Aegis Group. They're moving fast, using rental vans and blending into commercial traffic. They expect you to hit the library immediately. And they expect me to run. I corrected him, taking inventory of the equipment Marsh had laid out for me. non-reflective tactical gear, specialized breaching tools disguised as maintenance equipment, and a high-frequency communications jammer disguised as a belt buckle. I need eyes inside the Sterling Library, Marsh. Floor plans, staff schedules, security redundancies. Everything. Already downloaded. The main reading room is open late for students, but the archives and rare book section, where binding _257 and 1994 _47 will be, is locked down. Access requires level 5 clearance. You don't have level 5. I have the skills to acquire it. The important thing is the structural weakness. Roberts thinks I'm after the data. I am. But first, I need the location where he is holding Ethan. I looked at the cryptext string again. Yale, Sterling. Binding _257 and 1994 _47. Ethan wouldn't send me only the location of the data, Marsh. He'd send me a path to him. I taught him to weave the personal into the professional. The code is a confession. I walked over to the largest monitor, pulling up the detailed blueprints of the Sterling Library, a labyrinth of stone and history. The key is in the numbers. 1994, his birth year. 47, the time on the stopwatch. That stopwatch, Marsh, was part of a shipment lost in New London, near New Haven. That story, the audit, the missing timers, was a rumor I followed decades ago. It led me to discover an old, forgotten military bunker built beneath the campus in the late 1960s, used for secure storage during the Cold War. Marsh whistled. A sublevel bunker beneath the Sterling Library? That's gold. It's not in the blueprints. It was sealed off and never officially decommissioned. It would be the perfect place for Roberts to hold a high-value asset, especially one who knows too much about his history. Roberts wasn't holding Ethan at a standard Aegis Black site. He was holding him close, in a place only a handful of senior archivists knew about, near the source of the confrontation. I looked at the coordinates of the Sterling Library Archive section, focusing on the coordinates of Shelf 257. Marsh, I need a detailed structural analysis of the section surrounding Shelf 257. I need to find the access point to the sealed sublevel. While Marsh rapidly worked the consoles, I prepared the physical tools. My hands moved with the practiced economy of motion I thought I had forgotten. The weight of the equipment felt right. The stiffness was gone. 9 years of restoration work had honed my precision. The archivist merely needed to supply the intent. Found it, Marsh suddenly announced. Shelf 257 is in the older Eastern Wing. Structural report shows an anomaly in the foundation directly beneath that section. A high-density void, approximately 30 feet down. It has the dimensions of an old communication silo. That's it, I confirmed. The timer, the 47, isn't about the exact spot on the shelf. It's about the exact timing required to bypass the security on the silo access door. A frequency or a pulse. The full data, the backup, is likely hidden within the hollowed-out spine of the book on Shelf 257, but the location of the bunker is the main prize. My goal was clear: get into the library, retrieve the final data link, and then use that data to trade for Ethan's freedom and expose Roberts. But after the emotional toll of the confrontation with Roberts, I realized something else. My objective wasn't just survival and justice. It was reconciliation. Before I left the mobile command post, I had to secure Eleanor. If I failed, Roberts would come for her, not out of revenge, but to erase the only remaining connection to the Van Cess. I initiated the secure, closed-loop satellite link Marsh had established for her. Her face appeared on the small screen, tired but resolute. "You're going in, aren't you?" she asked, skipping the greeting. "I am. New Haven. Roberts is expecting me to run. I'm going to use that assumption against him. I'm going to make him chase me through the archives he's trying to steal. He knows where you are, Art. He's listening. He's listening to the ghost. El Marsh has him chasing phantoms right now. But that won't last." I looked directly into the camera, trying to convey everything I felt. The guilt, the love, the deep, terrifying necessity of what I was about to do. "I have secured your passage. Marsh's network will get you out of the country before sunrise. You'll be routed through South America, then a neutral jurisdiction. Your new identity is already established. You'll be safe, El. You will be far away from the blast radius. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. You're sending me away because you think you might not come back. I'm sending you away because you deserve peace, Cell. If I come back, I will find you. If I don't, you will have the evidence you need to finish the job. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and held up the crypt key. This is the last piece of leverage. I've copied the data string. I'm sending it to you now, encoded in a single message. If I don't contact you within 48 hours, I want you to give this string to Marsh. He will know exactly what to do with it. I transmitted the sequence, watching the confirmation light flash green. If they win, L, I need you to be the archivist. I need you to ensure that the truth, everything Ethan and I fought for, sees the light. Don't wait for me. Don't look back. Just survive. She nodded, biting her lip. I hate this, Arthur. I hate this world you drag us back into. I know, but I love you. That's why I'm doing this. She managed a fragile smile. Go bring our son home, Art, and be the monster you used to be just for one night. The line clicked off. The connection was wiped clean, no trace left behind. She was already moving. I looked at Marsh. Set the coordinates. Time to go to Yale. You've got 30 minutes until Aegis Group hits the main perimeter. Marsh confirmed, already starting the engine. What's the strategy? I picked up the breaching tools, testing their balance. The strategy is to make Robert Roberts realize that when you fight an archivist, you don't fight a soldier. You fight a scholar who knows the structural weaknesses of every building, every institution, and every man. And the ultimate goal, to restore order. I'm going to trade the data for Ethan in person. Then, I'm going to ensure that Robert's political career is shredded into finer pieces than any 17th century parchment I've ever repaired. He wants history. I'll give him an archive of shame he can never escape. The Sterling Memorial Library at 2:30 a.m. is an enormous mausoleum of silent knowledge. Its Gothic architecture, designed to inspire reverence, now provided excellent cover. Shadows stretched and curled around the stone buttresses and arched windows, perfect for stealth. Marsh dropped me off 2 blocks away. He would remain mobile, managing the Aegis Group's external movements, keeping them guessing about my entry point. I bypassed the main security systems easily. They were designed to detect crude, forced entry, not the meticulous movements of a professional infiltrator. I used a thin sheet of polished steel, a tool usually reserved for straightening delicate paper, to manipulate the internal tumbler of a rarely used service door in the basement. Click. Silent, clean, and untraceable. I was inside. The air was cool and heavy with the smell of old paper, leather, and institutional cleaner. The interior of the library was a world of hushed grandeur, but to me, it was a complex series of structural equations. I moved with the fluid efficiency that had been suppressed for a decade. Every step was calculated: weight distribution, acoustic dampening, awareness of the ceiling and floor vulnerabilities. My first priority, Shelf 257. I navigated the stacks, climbing 3 levels, moving deeper into the archive section. The reading room, visible through a glass partition, was mostly empty, save for 3 or 4 students slumped over laptops, oblivious to the high-stakes game of espionage unfolding around them. I reached the archives landing. A heavy, bolted steel door separated me from the rare documents. The door was secured by a magnetic lock requiring a biometric thumbprint and a 6-digit PIN code, monitored by a single, high-resolution camera. I avoided the camera's primary field of vision, placing a small, battery-operated infrared reflector on the lens housing, creating a blinding flare only visible to the camera sensor. The Aegis operatives watching the feed would see a momentary glitch, a dirty sensor warning, not a breach. The lock mechanism itself was standard high-grade corporate security, likely installed by Robert's people. I disabled the power conduit leading to the magnetic plate with a quick, precise cut of a ceramic blade, then opened the casing. I used a custom-made bypass key, a thin strip of etched silicon, to override the biometric scanner. The door clicked open. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me and re-engaging the security system remotely. Status quo maintained. The rare book archives were breathtaking. Thousands of volumes, shelf floor to ceiling, climate-controlled, bathed in soft, archival lighting. It was a perfect camouflage. I moved directly to the eastern wing, locating the stacks marked 200 to 300. I found shelf 257. It contained a run of obscure, early 20th century American history texts. I pulled out the specific volume identified by Ethan, The Evolution of the New England Railroad System, 1920 to 1940. It was heavy, thick, and utterly unremarkable. I ran my fingers along the spine, feeling the texture of the cloth. Just as with the Naval Treaty Book, the spine was slightly too stiff. Ethan's handiwork. I took the book and moved quickly to a nearby inspection table, using my small utility light. I carefully peeled back the cover. The final data was not inside the block of pages, but laminated directly into the cloth of the spine, a razor-thin, highly flexible digital storage medium. I extracted the storage wafer and plugged it into a small, shielded reader. The data loaded instantly. It was a master file, the complete archive, thousands of transactions, audio logs detailing Robert's orders to Aegis operatives, and high-resolution scans of compromised military documents. This was the key that would unlock the political collapse of Senator Roberts. But it was only half the puzzle. I needed Ethan. I looked at the structural analysis on my wrist-mounted pad, cross-referencing the silo coordinates. The access point was directly beneath the foundation of shelf 257, accessed through a small, square maintenance hatch concealed beneath a floor tile. As I worked, I heard the faint, rhythmic sound of movement from the exterior. Not students. Too controlled. The Aegis teams were entering the building. I transmitted the full data archive immediately to Marsh's secure satellite buffer. Message to Marsh, data secured. Full file uploading. Initiating phase 2. Now I was the bait. I located the floor tile, carefully lifting it with a suction cup. Beneath was a rusted, heavily bolted steel hatch. The bolts were ancient, but the center of the hatch had been modified. There was a modern, high-tech security panel, a rotary lock requiring a specific temporal pulse to open. The stopwatch, stuck at 47 seconds. The key wasn't the number 47. It was the frequency generated by the clock's original components, amplified by the precise timing of 47 ticks of the mechanism. I quickly rigged my jammer device, modifying its frequency signature to emulate the exact pulse of the hand-heart timer. 3 Aegis teams. Roberts knew I would go for the data. He wouldn't be far. I didn't try to hide the data acquisition. I stood up, placing the empty, hollowed-out book back on the shelf. I moved to the archive's door, opening it just enough to see down the main hallway. I saw them. 2 Aegis operatives, moving up the central staircase, their faces obscured by tactical masks, rifles held low. They weren't being subtle anymore. They were searching for the signal source. I pulled the door back, triggering a small, nearly silent acoustic alarm I had placed near the camera's blind spot. It was designed to sound like a minor system malfunction, enough to draw their attention, but not enough to trigger a full assault. I activated the hand-heart frequency pulse. The rotary lock on the hatch began to spin, emitting a low, mechanical grinding sound. The floor hatch opened with a heavy, metallic groan, revealing a pitch-black vertical shaft, the old communication silo. I didn't hesitate. I dropped into the shaft, my hands finding the rusted ladder, rungs immediately. As I began my descent, I heard the sound of running boots approaching the archive's door. "He's in the eastern wing. Move!" A voice barked over a shielded radio channel. I smiled in the darkness. They were exactly where I wanted them. Now, it was time to move the fight into the history Robert Roberts thought he had buried. The air in the silo was stagnant, tasting of ozone and damp limestone. It was profoundly quiet, absorbing sound like a sponge. The descent was quick. 30 feet down, the ladder ended at a heavy steel door, hermetically sealed, a relic of Cold War paranoia. I used a powerful flashlight. Engraved on the door, barely visible beneath decades of grime, was the insignia of the Army Corps of Engineers, 1968. I didn't need to breach the door. Ethan had already done that work. Near the base of the door, I saw a subtle sheen of epoxy sealant deliberately placed. Ethan had passed through here recently. I found the small, almost invisible pinhole he had left, a microscopic aperture used for feeding an electronic lead. I pushed a thin fiber optic cable through the pinhole. My screen immediately flickered to life. The security feed from inside the bunker. The bunker was a vast, sprawling room, temperature-controlled and clearly repurposed. It contained banks of servers, processing equipment, and rows of secure holding cells. And there, slumped on a cot in one of the cells, was Ethan, pale, exhausted, but breathing. And standing outside the cell, reviewing documents under a fluorescent lamp, was Robert Roberts himself. Roberts had come to New Haven. He wanted to observe the final phase of the operation, the retrieval of the data and the elimination of the threat, in person. He was arrogant enough to think he was safe in his bunker. Excellent. Phase 3, engagement. I didn't waste time on sentimentality. I needed to act before the Aegis teams reached me. I began setting up the trap. My tools were not bombs or heavy weaponry. They were the tools of a restorer, knowledge of chemistry, acoustics, and structural vulnerability. The silo was a resonant chamber. The steel door, thick and heavy, would amplify certain frequencies. I grabbed the breaching charge, a small, highly specialized package designed not for blast, but for sonic disruption. I attached it to the interior lip of the hatch I had just used. Then, I focused on the air filtration system. I used a pressurized canister of archival cleaning solution, highly volatile, designed to strip away acids and oxidation. I injected the solution directly into the air intake of the bunker, ensuring it would circulate a fine mist of highly concentrated, flammable vapor throughout the silo structure. Not enough to kill, but enough to incapacitate and confuse. I heard the scraping sound of tactical boots above me. The Aegis teams had reached the hatch. "He's down the shaft. Seal the top," a voice yelled. I pressed the button on my modified belt buckle, the acoustic jammer. The small charge detonated with a low, heavy thrum. Not a loud explosion, but a powerful, low-frequency pressure wave amplified by the steel shaft. Above, I heard simultaneous shouts of pain and confusion. The pressure wave had momentarily disoriented and partially deafened the operatives closing in on the shaft. "Marsh, Aegis teams are compromised. I'm initiating entry into the sublevel bunker. Prepare for extraction." I then activated the final sequence on the door. Ethan's wire was a bypass. I sent a rapid, timed sequence of electrical pulses through the pinhole. The heavy steel door hissed open, allowing me access to the bunker. I stepped inside the dimly lit cavern. Senator Roberts looked up from his paperwork, his eyes wide with surprise, then twisting into cold fury. "Arthur, you insolent fool. You actually came here." He reached for the side of his desk, a black, standard-issue pistol. "Don't, Robert." I warned him, raising my own P229, aiming for center mass. "You're in a highly pressurized environment, and the air is currently saturated with volatile chemicals. Any sudden movement, any bullet, could ignite the entire silo. I brought my own archival cleaning solvents. Robert, they restore order, but they are highly reactive." Roberts froze, his hand hovering over the weapon. He knew the risk. The look in his eyes wasn't just fear, it was professional frustration. "You still think you have the advantage, Arthur. But I have your son, and my teams will be here in minutes." I walked towards a cell where Ethan was imprisoned, keeping my weapon steady. "No, Robert," I said softly. "Your teams are disoriented and trapped in a shaft, and you made the ultimate logistical error. You assumed I came alone. I didn't. I brought the truth. And the truth, Robert, is about to be uploaded to every server in Washington." I activated my last device, a small, portable satellite transmitter disguised as a badge pin. It began beaming a compressed signal into the stratosphere. "It's done, Robert. The full archive, Ethelred, the contracts, the blackmail material. It's on every server where the truth can't be deleted. You have minutes before the world knows you funded your campaign by selling classified military assets." Robert's face went slack with shock, then contorted in rage. You didn't. You wouldn't risk your son's life. I stopped directly outside Ethan's cell. I looked through the bars at my son, who watched the confrontation with bewildered exhaustion. The data is already gone, Robert. Now, we negotiate the only thing of value left, your survival. What do you want, Arthur? Immunity? Money. I want the key to this cell, Robert. And then I want you to walk out of this bunker and surrender to the first law enforcement officer you see. Or, I put a bullet in your chest, risk the volatile air, and ensure that your legacy is nothing but a footnote in an archive of treason. He looked at my face, realizing the depth of my resolve. The quiet restorer was gone. The cold, effective operative who authored extraction protocols had returned. And he knew I never bluff. The silence in the bunker was thicker than the dust. Robert Roberts, the powerful senator, the self-proclaimed architect of stability, stood paralyzed by the simple logic of an untenable position. He was trapped by his own arrogance, the assumption that I valued the data more than my son, and the certainty that I would not risk mutually assured destruction. You're bluffing, Arthur, Robert spat, his voice trembling slightly. You care too much for order. You won't risk igniting this atmosphere. You need me to walk out. I do prefer order, I conceded, lowering the barrel of the P2-29 an inch, but maintaining pressure. But you misunderstand the nature of my current task, Robert. I'm not here to preserve your life. I'm here to restore justice. Sometimes, restoration requires removing the corroded parts entirely. The collateral damage in the shaft above us will be blamed on a gas leak from this forgotten bunker. You, however, will be clearly identified as a political figure found in a compromising position, surrounded by evidence of treason. I looked pointedly at the small, clear vials I had strapped to my belt. Vials containing highly volatile chemicals used for separating ancient ink from parchment, substances that ignite with the slightest spark. Make your choice, Robert. Freedom for Ethan, immediate surrender, and a chance for you to negotiate a plea deal with the FBI, who will be here by dawn. Or a high-profile execution that will solve all my current problems. Robert stared at the satellite transmitter blinking on my jacket. He knew the data was gone. His empire had been compromised by a single, perfectly executed data dump. The key, he rasped, lifting his hand slowly. He reached into his pocket and produced a small, magnetic card, the access key to Ethan's cell. I held out my free hand. He slid the card across the floor. As he watched me approach the cell, a flicker of professional cunning returned to his eyes. You think this is over, Arthur? You think simply exposing me ends the Aegis Group? This structure is bigger than me. It's embedded. And once they know you're the one who tore it down, they will come for you. And for Eleanor. And for your son. Then I will be ready, I said, inserting the card into the slot. The cell door clicked open. Ethan looked up, his face etched with confusion, fear, and a dawning understanding. Dad, we're leaving, Ethan. We're going home. I pulled Ethan to his feet. He was weak but mobile. I pressed a finger to his lips. Silence was paramount. As I guided Ethan out of the cell, I heard a new sound, a faint scraping from the ceiling of the bunker. The disoriented Aegis teams were beginning their descent into the silo, recovering from the sonic attack. Time to go, Robert, I instructed, pushing Ethan towards the ventilation shaft opening. Move. Roberts, realizing his window of opportunity was closing, started towards the silo door. Wait, I commanded, stopping him with a wave of my P2-29. One more thing. Roberts froze, confusion replacing fear. I didn't aim the gun. I aimed my movement. With a sudden, swift motion born of decades of focused, explosive energy, I lunged forward, not towards his chest, but towards his dominant arm. I didn't fire. I used the butt of the P2-29 to deliver a precise, crushing strike to the radius bone of his right arm. A sickening crunch echoed in the cavern. Robert screamed, clutching his shattered forearm. I then yanked his wrist, spun him, and slammed his back against the server racks. My other hand grabbed his jacket lapel. That, I whispered into his ear, the archivist's voice cold and deadly, is for using my family. Now move. Slowly, the operatives began to drop into the bunker. Two figures in full tactical gear landed heavily, their weapons raised. Hold! Hold your fire! Robert screamed, nursing his arm. He's got me. He'll ignite the gas. Exactly, I confirmed to the operatives, pushing Roberts ahead of me like a shield. Drop your weapons. Your orders have been compromised. Your superior is now facing treason charges, and you are accessories. Make one wrong move, and the volatile environment will be the least of your concerns. The operatives hesitated. They saw their leader, bloody and broken, held by a calm, older man in a tailored suit. They saw the sheer impossibility of the situation. I used the confusion. I pushed Roberts hard toward the main exit tunnel, a reinforced corridor leading to an exterior service hatch. Go, Ethan. Marsh is waiting at the secondary access point. Ethan, moving on instinct, scrambled into the exit tunnel. I followed, keeping Roberts' position between me and the two remaining operatives. I didn't need to defeat them. I just needed to exit the bunker and leave Roberts in a compromising situation. As I reached the tunnel entrance, I delivered one final kick to Roberts' back, propelling him sprawling into the center of the room. Enjoy the archive, Robert, I called out, then slammed the massive steel exit door shut, engaging the internal manual override. The slam was followed by the deafening sound of frustrated Aegis operatives attempting to breach the door. The escape tunnel was narrow, damp, and smelled of earth and old copper wiring. Ethan moved ahead of me, driven by pure survival instinct. How did you find me? Ethan gasped, leaning heavily against the tunnel wall. The timer, and your choice of reading material, I replied, checking the tunnel for secondary traps. You always were obsessed with the structural secrets of this campus. I tried to stop them. They were coming for the data center. I knew they'd find the backup, but I had to get the key to you. I knew only you'd see the scratch. It worked. You did well, son. The words felt raw, yet necessary. We reached the final external hatch, a discreet access point beneath an old, overgrown maintenance shed on the far side of the campus. Marsh was already there, the panel van idling, the back doors open. Get in, now, Marsh yelled, scanning the perimeter with night vision. We scrambled into the back of the van. Marsh slammed the doors and accelerated immediately, the tires spitting gravel. Status report, Marsh, I ordered, collapsing onto the floor next to Ethan. Aegis is in chaos. They're locked inside the bunker. They're trying to contain the media leak, but it's too late. The data is propagating. My network is ensuring maximum visibility. And Roberts, he's trapped. The local PD is already on the scene, investigating reports of structural damage and a potential gas leak at the library. Roberts will be found shortly, a U.S. senator injured in a secret Cold War bunker, surrounded by paramilitary operatives. The narrative writes itself, Arthur. I looked at Ethan, pulling a thermal blanket over his shoulders. He was alive. He was safe. The primary objective was achieved. Marsh, reroute. We're not going far. We're going to the nearest secure surgical clinic. Ethan needs immediate medical attention. Use the disposable identities we prepped years ago. As the van sped away from the chaos of the Yale campus, I allowed myself to relax for the first time in 9 years. The confrontation was over. The physical threat was neutralized. The archivist had won. But victory, as I well knew, was rarely clean. I looked at Ethan, who was staring at me with a mixture of awe and residual hostility. The path to reconciliation would be longer and more difficult than the fight itself. The archives of our family history still needed careful restoration. The ensuing political and media explosion was exactly as clean and brutal as I had designed it. We stayed off the grid for a week, hidden in a nondescript medical facility Marsh owned, a complex built under the guise of an executive wellness retreat outside Philadelphia. Ethan received treatment for dehydration, minor wounds, and severe exhaustion. He was alive, whole, and finally safe. Meanwhile, the world was unraveling. The narrative Marsh fed to the press was devastating in its simplicity and undeniable truth. The discovery of Senator Roberts, the Intelligence Oversight Chairman, trapped in a secret military bunker with a broken arm and 2 armed, unofficial operatives, was a catastrophic image. The initial news focused on the Georgetown connection, the illegal use of offshore funds, Ethelred Logistics, to fuel a massive political machine. Then came the data, disseminated through dozens of independent, journalistic leaks. Audio logs confirming Roberts' orders to use the Aegis Group to suppress information and extract historical assets, classified military hardware. The core of the scandal wasn't just corruption. It was the treasonous privatization of a national security apparatus. Roberts was arrested immediately, charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of classified materials. The media frenzy was blinding. The New York Times ran a front-page exposé titled, "The Archivist's Desk: How Political Blackmail Built a Senate Empire." My name, Arthur Vance, never appeared in connection with the scandal. Marsh, with surgical precision, ensured that all evidence pointed to an anonymous source within the intelligence community, or Ethan himself, who was lauded as a heroic, lone wolf journalist who had risked his life to expose the truth. This was the nature of my restoration work, making the truth visible while keeping the restorer in the shadows. One morning, the television in the retreat's common area showed a live report from Capitol Hill. A congressional committee was being formed to investigate the Aegis Group. The political damage was irreparable. Roberts was finished. "They're calling you a hero, Ethan," I said, watching him watch the news. Ethan looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time since the rescue. "They're calling me a hero. They should be calling you the architect of this downfall. You didn't just expose him, Dad. You annihilated his legacy. I merely facilitated the truth he tried to bury." I corrected him. "You found the raw material, Ethan. I just applied the proper solvent and structure. You used the fear of the volatile atmosphere to neutralize his armed guards. You fractured his wrist to prevent him from communicating, and you used the cover of a gas leak to ensure the local police, not the FBI, found him. That's not mere facilitation, Dad. That's a black operation designed for maximum political embarrassment." I accepted the assessment with a nod. "I am who I am, Ethan. I am a man who understands consequences. And Robert Roberts needed a consequence that was politically fatal." Ethan smiled, a thin, tired expression. "You know, when I found that microdot on the stopwatch, I thought I was sending you a clue to my location. I realize now I was sending you an admission. I'm in over my head, and only you can fix it." "Why the scratch mark, Ethan? How did you know the code?" "I didn't," he admitted. "I didn't know it was a distress signal. I knew it was yours. When they captured me and told me they were sending you the package, they were boasting. They said the wax seal would lure the old dog out of his hole. I realized they intended to use you. I managed to scratch the matrix of the seal. I just had time to damage it with the sharp edge of a paperclip before they pressed the wax. I knew you'd see the flaw. I just didn't know what it meant. It meant everything," I said, the truth finally settling between us. He had fought, not with weapons, but with the subtle defiance I had taught him years ago. The belief that detail reveals the lie. The silence that followed wasn't the suffocating silence of estrangement. It was the quiet of two men, linked by blood and a difficult past, finally operating on the same frequency. The most difficult restoration is always the human connection. A few days later, Ethan was strong enough to leave the clinic. We flew discreetly to the temporary safe house Marsh established in rural Vermont, a quiet, isolated log cabin surrounded by maples. The air was clean, the only sound the wind through the pines. We sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I need to know, Dad." Ethan started, his voice quiet. "When I left, when I accused you of being the butcher, was any of it true?" I took a deep breath of the cold air, feeling the weight of the years. "The documentation I gave you is fake, but based on real events. The regime collapse was inevitable, and it was brutal. My role, and the role of the archives, was to go in after the fighting, the cleanup crew. We secured assets, extracted compromised personnel, and yes, we often had to make impossible choices about who lived and who died based on strategic necessity." "So you didn't engineer the collapse for profit?" "No. We were fighting to prevent a power vacuum that would have been filled by entities far worse than Roberts. We were fighting for control, Ethan, for stability. But sometimes maintaining stability required terrible cruelty. I made choices I regret. Choices I paid for by walking away. You chose to be the villain, so I could be the hero, Ethan concluded. I chose to be the shield. I corrected him gently. I knew that if you stayed close, the consequences of my past would eventually consume you. I thought the hatred would keep you safe. Ethan nodded slowly. It didn't keep me safe, but it taught me to look deeper, to be ruthless in my pursuit of the truth. That's what saved me, ultimately. Your training. I'm sorry for the lies, son. I am sorry for the distance. I understand the reason now, he said. He didn't forgive me yet, but he understood. That was enough. So what happens now? The Aegis group isn't gone. They'll know you were the trigger. The Aegis group will be contained, I assured him. Roberts was the head of the snake. Without his congressional cover and funding, they will fragment. They will go back to being small, desperate contractors. We're no longer fighting an institution. We're fighting criminals. And I know how to fight criminals. The sound of a vehicle crunching on the gravel driveway interrupted us. Eleanor stepped out of the car. She looked tired, but the tension was gone from her face. She saw Ethan, healthy and standing on the porch, and her reserve broke. She ran, hugging him fiercely. I watched them, a profound sense of closure washing over me. The archive of my family was finally, painfully, being restored. Eleanor settled into the quiet routine of the cabin quickly. She didn't ask about the past. She focused on the present. We were together, safe, and the danger had receded. Marsh sent a final, comprehensive report 3 days later. Roberts was refusing to cooperate, but the evidence was overwhelming. The structure was breaking down. One final thing, Art. Marsh's message read. The Aegis Group assets are being liquidated. The offshore money is frozen. The government is seizing all physical property, except for one small historical artifact. They delivered it to your old workshop in Boston. No note, just the item. I frowned. What artifact could possibly be important enough for a collapsing intelligence group to send back to me? We returned to Beacon Hill 3 days later. The gallery was intact, pristine. The old scent of shellac and leather was comforting. The artifact sat on my central workbench, under the spotlight where the navigational map had been. It was the Crimson Book, a compendium of European naval treaties. It was empty, its contents now part of the global media landscape. But it was not discarded. It had been professionally restored. The tear on the spine was meticulously mended. The buckram was cleaned. I ran my finger over the surface. It was perfect, and then I saw it. On the final page, where the end papers met the spine, there was a tiny hand-drawn symbol in permanent black ink. A stylized eagle. The archivist's seal. But the eagle's eye, the place where I had placed the scratch 30 years ago, was no longer fractured. It had been carefully filled in, mended by an expert hand, making the symbol whole again. It was a final message from the fragmented Aegis group. We know who you are. We know you won. And we respect your skill. It was a warning, too. They knew I had repaired the order. But they knew order was fragile. I looked at the perfection of the restoration. It was a flawless piece of work. What is it? Ethan asked, peering over my shoulder. A note, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. A reminder that even in chaos, there is discipline, and a promise that I am seen. I picked up the book and placed it carefully on a high shelf in my private collection. It would serve as a permanent archive of the last 2 weeks. I returned to my work. The 17th century navigational chart still needed its final protective coating. But something had shifted in me. The need for rigid, suffocating control was lessened. I had faced the past, embraced the monster I had tried to hide, and found that my capacity for love and protection was stronger than my need for peace. Ethan decided to use the momentum of the Roberts scandal to launch an independent journalism foundation dedicated to exposing the kind of high-level corruption the Aegis Group represented. He wasn't running for me anymore. He was building his world adjacent to mine, knowing I was there if he needed the quiet brutality of logistics. I was no longer just Arthur Vance, the quiet restorer. I was Arthur Vance, the man who had the capability to restore anything, be it a 400-year-old document or a broken family. I looked at my hand, holding the fine brush loaded with clear conservation resin. I applied the resin to the restored piece of the map. Control is an illusion. Time is the only true constant. That was the archivist's philosophy. But a new philosophy was emerging. Love is the only constant worth fighting for. I finished the coding. The map was seamless, the repair invisible. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the stillness. Then I opened them, reached for my tools, and picked up the solid brass matrix for my personal seal, the one with the eagle. I studied the surface, which had been restored by the Aegis operative. Perfect. I took the finest point I owned, a diamond-tipped scribe, and with a slow, deliberate movement, I scored a new line. Not a fracture across the eye, but a tiny, almost imperceptible symbol beneath the eagle's feet, the Roman numeral 3, the symbol of the third man in the family, the symbol that marked the territory of Arthur Vance, Ethan Vance, and Eleanor Vance. The seal was whole, but it had evolved. It now represented the thing I would fight for, and the thing I was willing to kill for. I dipped the new matrix into the hot, red wax. Perfect. The mark was sharp, clean, and entirely new. I am Arthur Vance, and now I am ready for the next silence, because I know the peace is earned, not given.